James Parker wasn't your typical criminal mastermind. He wore a suit, not a tracksuit. He had a degree in finance, not forgery. But James Parker, as the California courts would come to know him, was running one of the most audacious cannabis scams the state had ever seen. He was hiding in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing, raking in millions while technically playing by the rules. Except the rules were as hazy as a Californian dispensary on a Friday night. The year was 2010, and California's medical marijuana laws were about as clear as a bong hit to the face. It was a wild west of dispensaries, collectives, and a whole lot of green. And James Parker, he was about to become its most unlikely outlaw. Picture California in 2010. The economy, tanking harder than a teenager trying to shotgun a beer. Unemployment, higher than Snoop Dogg at a Cypress Hill concert. But amidst the financial misery, a new industry was budding: medical marijuana. California's Proposition 215, passed in 1996, allowed for the use of medical cannabis. But the law was vague, its interpretation even vaguer. Dispensaries popped up like Starbucks, each with their own interpretation of medical necessity. It was the Wild West, with more tie-dye and slightly fewer gunfights. James Parker, however, knew nothing about tie-dye or gunfights. He was a numbers guy, a former financial analyst with a nose for loopholes and a taste for the finer things in life. He saw the chaos of the California cannabis industry not as a moral quagmire, but as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He realized that while selling weed was technically illegal, selling wellness services and educational materials was not. And who's to say those services couldn't be enhanced by the presence of a certain herbal supplement? James got to work. He created a web of shell companies, each more legitimate sounding than the last: California Wellness Collective, Green Horizons Educational Services, Organic Therapies United. On paper, they were squeaky clean. He recruited members for his collectives, people who, for a fee, could access his wellness services. These services just happened to include a very specific type of herbal therapy. And because these were technically collectives, not dispensaries, they flew under the radar of most law enforcement. James was meticulous. He kept detailed records, issued membership cards, and even had his collectives adhere to strict operating hours. He wanted everything to look legit, even if the legitimacy was thinner than a rolling paper. And here's the kicker: he paid taxes. Not on the weed, of course, but on the membership fees and educational materials. He knew that a little tax revenue could go a long way in keeping the authorities off his back. He was playing a dangerous game, but he was playing it smart. The money, of course, was the trickiest part. James couldn't just deposit duffel bags full of cash into his bank account, so he got creative. He used his shell companies to funnel the money, disguising it as payments for consulting services and marketing expenses. He invested in legitimate businesses, using them as fronts to launder the cash. He even set up offshore accounts, just in case. James Parker was a financial wizard, and he was using all his magic to keep his green empire afloat. For years, James's scheme worked flawlessly. He was pulling in millions, living the high life, and all the while staying one step ahead of the law. He donated to local charities, even sponsored a little league team. He was the ultimate cannabis kingpin, successful, discreet, and seemingly untouchable. He knew the legal landscape was shifting, that legalization was a real possibility. And he was betting that when it did, he'd be in a prime position to go legit. He was a businessman after all, just capitalizing on a unique opportunity. But like all good things, James's luck eventually ran out. It wasn't the cops who brought him down, it was his own greed. He'd become careless, sloppy even. He trusted the wrong people, confided in the wrong ears, and one disgruntled employee, passed over for a promotion, decided to become a very wealthy informant. The authorities had been building a case against James for months. They'd been watching him, tracking his movements, tapping his phones. And when they finally swooped in, they had everything they needed to bring his empire crashing down. James Parker's trial was big news in California. Here was this clean-cut businessman exposed as the mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar cannabis empire. The prosecution painted him as a greedy criminal, exploiting a legal grey area for his own personal gain. The defense argued that he was just a savvy entrepreneur operating within the bounds of a confusing and contradictory law. The jury, however, was not convinced. James Parker was found guilty on multiple counts of money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to distribute marijuana. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, his assets seized, his empire dismantled. The real kicker: just a few years after James Parker was sent to prison, California fully legalized recreational marijuana. The very thing that had landed him behind bars was now perfectly legal, a legitimate billion-dollar industry. The irony was not lost on James, nor on the many others who had been caught in the crosshairs of California's confusing cannabis laws. James Parker's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that operating in legal grey areas, no matter how lucrative, can have serious consequences. It's a story about ambition, greed, and the unintended consequences of prohibition. No one knows for sure what happened to James Parker after he was released from prison. Some say he went off the grid, determined to rebuild his fortune in a new, legal industry. Others whisper that he's consulting for some of the biggest names in the cannabis game. His expertise in navigating the legal and financial complexities of the industry more valuable than ever. Whatever became of James Parker, one thing is certain. His story, like the pungent aroma of cannabis itself, lingers in the air. A reminder of a time when the green rush was a wild, unpredictable, and often unforgiving ride.